Welcome everybody to our webinar today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce myself and our guest today. If you will submit your questions in the Q&A tab on your screen, we will answer all questions at the end. And also just as a note, this webinar is being recorded, so we will share out that link afterwards. All right. So meet your speakers. Hi, I'm Christina Harrison, Agency Insights Manager here at Bombora. I work closely with agencies such as Just Global on things such as platform training, planning and measurement, and as well as reporting services. And joining us today from Just Global is Marcus Hiles. Marcus, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. I'm Marcus Hiles. I work within our strategic solutions group within Just Global, and I am involved in a lot of the account-based marketing planning that we do for the agency, as well as heading up our kind of insights function as well. So yeah, thank you.
Lovely. And with that, Marcus, I don't know if you want to cover kind of what you plan on going over today, and then I'll dive in a little bit about how all of this works, and then we'll turn it over to Marcus for the majority of the presentation.
Yeah, certainly. So today what we've got is hopefully some real life examples for you to allow you to see how to utilize intent, specifically Bombora, within your marketing planning, all the way through to activation. So we've got 5 use cases on screen at the moment. We're going to be running through these in a bit of detail and actually showing you some real life customer examples of these. They've all been anonymized, but it gives you kind of hopefully an example of how you can physically use the platform and take real value out of it as well.
Perfect. So before we dive in, it is important to note how all of this works, and what value Just Global is going to talk about today is through Company Surge. It's important to note Company Surge tells you which businesses are researching and spiking with intent on products or services that your company or your competitors sell. We use this data to help marketers prioritize leads, business research, planning, measurement, brand analysis, and it's a really useful tool. How we do that and how we are able to identify when a company is surging on a specific topic, we classify that as intent. It is important to note that we look at intent as a change in content consumption over a 12-week baseline. So a company such as myself, Bombora, it's pretty typical that you're going to see us here on this bottom line continuously searching research data about analytics and things of that nature and intent. But say all of a sudden, large quantities of individuals from my company started researching cloud security. And that's a change in our typical research consumption for that specific topic. That's going to signal a spike, and that is what we call intent, and that is what Company Surge is. It is a change in research behavior for a specific topic against our topic taxonomy, and that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Thanks, Christina. So before we get in, just wanted to give you a very high-level overview of our agency and what we do, and then we'll get straight into some real-life examples for you. So Just Global is an independent, integrated B2B marketing agency. We have specialisms across marketing strategy, creative media, and analytics, and we essentially work with some of the world's largest brands, helping to drive their growth strategies and increasing their customer lifetime value. We do this out of our key offices based in the US, UK, Singapore, and Australia. And I think that probably gives you enough on this frame, really. So yeah, really looking forward to going through this. We've got quite a broad range of service offerings that we cover, number of different program types that we do as well. And where we use intent here really is around how to kind of support our planning and execution capabilities. So we typically utilize it within the account-based marketing programs, where we can get some deeper insights, and then we use it in the activation of kind of brand to demand programs as well. Brilliant. So before we get into it, intent can be used for a number of different use cases. We've got 5 core examples that we're going to go through today, but what it can really do is help improve your planning. So it can help you understand the market that you're essentially operating within, give you a really good feel for what that total addressable market is, all the way down to understanding where people sit within the funnel itself. So you can segment your marketing programs in various different ways with that kind of intelligence. Another area which is really useful is around the content creation side of it. So understanding what messages people are engaging with, you can use that to essentially build out different propositions, messaging frameworks, and you can also use it alongside keyword research and social listening to help with your ongoing SEO strategies. 2 more use cases. So one is around activation. You can essentially use it to understand, make sure that your marketing is just targeting specific organizations. And again, as I say, you can use that based on where they are in the funnel or what they're consuming. And then the other thing that's quite important is that you can actually use this data with your sales and BDR team. So they can prioritize accounts and they can actually prioritize on which accounts they should be following up with, which really helps on that side as well. So kind of getting the most accounts engaged early on. Next frame. Brilliant. So we're going to run through our 5 use cases. I mentioned total addressable markets. If we go back 1 frame, Christina. So total addressable markets, there's your TAM, there's SAM, there's SOM. You can use intent to kind of go through all of these different areas. If we just dive into the first frame, this is an example of us essentially looking at the B2B marketing automation space. We were working with one of our vendors, one of our clients in this area. To start with, what we did was we looked at the UK market, which was where they were interested in. We saw 59,000 organizations looking for B2B marketing automation software. And that's normally over kind of a 3-month window that we look at. You can increase that to 90 or even longer. But that basically gives us the ability to understand how many companies overall have been looking at this kind of technology set. And then what we tend to do is we'll then layer on top of that the companies that are actually in market or spiking on intents, just kind of looking at this topic over and over. And from that, we saw about 2,900 organizations. So that gives us a really kind of clear view of, what the market opportunity could be and then where, the opportunity is right now, essentially. And when we dissect that data, you can clearly see in the breakdown there, where those companies sit within the different buyer journey stages, whether they're doing early research into this or quite in-depth research into this particular offering. And you can break it down even further into, the size of the organizations, for example. And you can see here, we've got about 850 that are enterprise companies. That's the market that we were going after for this specific campaign. So it gives a really good kind of footing for the planning side of the program.
And Marcus, just a general question, because typically, I work with you and James and agencies. What is your clients' initial responses to seeing this intent data? Do they get it? Do they understand it? Do they find it valuable? What are kind of their initial responses when you present this to them?
Yeah, I think, the feedback we get is always positive, which is a great angle on it. But the thing that's quite useful to kind of contextualize for people is that there's a small stat on the screen here, which is kind of 4.9%. And there's a typical percentage that's banded around in the B2B worlds that, only roughly 5% of your, prospective audience is actually in market at any given time. And the intent data that we take from Bombora literally shows us that the percentage changes from roughly 4 to 6% depending on the product offering, but it's a pretty good benchmark. And it's nice having the theory and then actually being able to back that up with the data that we get out of Bombora.
Awesome. Yeah.
So obviously on the frame before we had, the size of the organization that was, most interested to us, and we had about 800, ish organizations that were enterprise size. We can layer that data further, so we can actually look at the industries that breaks this all down as well. And you can see here how what we've done is we've taken that data, We've then split it across the industries that Bombora has given us. We've then worked out from a planning perspective that actually, 11 core industries are where we should probably be focusing here, given that 83% of the intent's coming from that. And then we paired that with a slightly different exercise, which was looking at our clients' vertical breakdowns that they typically use. And we identified in this particular instance that 2 segments that they didn't have on their list could actually be used within ongoing planning, and that was manufacturing and professional services in this instance. So again, just showing you how some of this data can then inform the strategy and direction that we probably wouldn't have thought about, had we just worked from the list that was given to us essentially.
And I think that's what we see a lot of times within planning, right? Like you have the ideal audience that your client probably thinks is the ideal audience. So really to come back and be able to show that maybe it is the right audience, but they're missing key pieces or key audiences that are currently in market that they might not have thought about initially. So it's really cool to see it in practice here with you guys.
That's exactly it. You don't know what you don't know at the end until you've
right.
done it.
Yeah, exactly.
So our second use case is around validating the account list. So we will do a lot of work with clients. Often we're provided with a target account list to then utilize in the marketing programs. If we just dive into this, and I'll talk you through it. So the client example that we've got on screen here is a cybersecurity vendor. They're interested in a product offering called SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. We started by looking at the market. So we can see we've got roughly 19,000 organizations, large enterprise companies in the US and Canada that we're going after here, or could go after here. And you can see on the right, the number of companies that are in that in-depth research stage here. So that gave us a really good clue for what the industry looks like. They're clearly switched on in terms of this proposition. They're doing quite a lot of research around it. So they're at a point where you can go to market with them with a quite specific, even potentially a product focused message if you want to here. If we go to the next frame, so they gave us an account list. Which, first off, we wanted to understand whether that account list matched the type of data that we got out of the Bombora when we looked at the market. And we also wanted to understand whether these organizations were also kind of enterprise in size. So we were able to match about 97% of the accounts, which was really strong. And you can see here how they broke down on the left-hand side. So we were using Bombora to validate the account list, essentially. There are a number of companies in there which were quite small and didn't really fit that enterprise framework that we were working and discussing with the client. So that became something that we could straight away discuss with them as to why some of these smaller accounts were in the cluster. And you can see on the right just how much in-depth research they're actually undertaking. So the vast majority of the accounts are really heavily considering this type of solution set, which again was great to see that it mirrored the data we had before. Just for context, we don't normally see anywhere near that level of in-depth research from the account list. And one of the reasons is cybersecurity is an incredibly hot and topical agenda. We've obviously got the war in Ukraine happening at the moment, which is kind of bringing that front of mind for a lot of companies as well. So.
And also just being able to then create lookalikes based off of this, right? Like if you needed to scale it larger, that's now a possibility because you can see that this audience is already in-depth research. You can see that firmographic, demographic information and be able to create more of them. That's
exactly it. And we can even go as far as using Bombora to, if you take your account list, you can then break down to understand what size of the accounts are we looking at, what industries are in, etc. So for lookalike audiences, it's perfect to kind of get your benchmark. Something else that we looked at this program or looked at doing with this program was really around whether we could take that target account list, so that kind of large group that we had before, and then how we could look at splitting that down to a much smaller list to have in slightly more targeted activity. So what we looked at doing was identifying which topics these accounts were engaging with, and then essentially trying to understand whether that was an option to segment by. So we've got our topics on the left here. You can see on the right hand side, just a very simple pivot allows us to see that we've got about 50 companies that are consuming all of these topics, and these topics range from competitor brands, they range from solution offerings, and top of funnel content as well. So it gives us a really good feel for where they might be in that kind of whole buyer journey.
And just to add context to this, we have about 11,000 topics that we study content consumption on. So our taxonomy is quite large. So these are just obviously specific to this campaign.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the journey, is actually identifying the topics relevant for your project that you're working on, essentially.
But don't worry, that's why you have me to help you. You don't have to start from scratch.
Exactly. So this screen here really just shows you some of that topic consumption in action. So the orange bar that you've got in there is essentially the number of topics that you're seeing spiking intent, and then the blue chart at the bar at the top is really the it's the average search score that we're seeing across these topics, essentially. So Bombora does do a really good job at visualizing some of this data. It's great for kind of presenting to management teams and kind of, back into the business. You can see a whole host of companies that were, consuming more than, or essentially the total number of topics that we put into the platform. And all of this was then passed over to sales to help them with, finalizing that account selection process. So marketing's very much got a kind of informing element to that account selection with this approach.
Yeah, and especially if you consider, we start reporting intent on a level 60 surge score, just for everyone's knowledge on this call. So if you see like 50, right above that would be 60. Look at all the companies that are over index or, over showing intent or have higher intent, which is increased likelihood that they're interested in purchasing that product or service. So really cool. It's good to see all the spikes.
So value propositions, getting your message kind of on point, essentially. If we go into the next frame, so this example shows you how you can use the platform to, and in this case, we actually uploaded the account list into the platform. That will then, with your topic selection, allows you to start to understand which topics these different organizations are consuming. And in this instance, our client wanted to enter the utilities market. So, we took their existing value proposition and we looked at how we could adapt that to make it more relevant for the topics that these organizations were kind of consuming. And, elements that were jumping out to us were around, e-commerce fraud, instant payment, mobile payment. Our client in this instance is a leading global payment processing company. So it was great to see that we were starting to get engagement on the topics that they, obviously, are very strong and aligned to. And it allowed us to then develop the value proposition specifically for utilities, pulling out all these pain points that they're researching to make sure that our client's proposition was, as targeted as possible for the campaign, really. Another example here is just around how we can then start to do, proper campaign planning with, I say proper, it's all proper, but how we can use the intent to really inform the planning, essentially. So if we dive into this. So in this example, we weren't given that much information around the account list. We normally get quite a bit of information around it, but we were given a list which essentially had customer accounts within that. And then obviously for compliant reasons, they didn't want to reveal to us too much more information than just the brand names, essentially. So, we don't typically get involved with PII. So, that was quite a understandable position to be in. What we used was Bombora to allow us to understand a bit more about these accounts. So we started off by running it through a Bombora, which allowed us to understand the size of these organizations, the revenue for these organizations, and then also which industries they're typically in as well. So if we dive into the next frame here, this gives you a feel for, how these companies were structured, essentially. So these accounts were, quite broad in scale. We had some small accounts in here, large accounts, but we started seeing clusters around, the mid to kind of large enterprise size, really 50 employees upwards. And we also saw some variations in the revenue kind of figures coming out of these accounts as well. So we didn't get a huge match because quite a lot of the accounts were quite smaller organizations, but we've got about 42% as a match rate in this instance. So it does vary, but it did give us sufficient information to enable us to start, putting some thoughts down and plan from that. And you can see here that the mid-market and going up was kind of the key area that we should be focusing in for this initiative.
And I think that's what's really exciting about, Bombora, and this isn't me selling myself because I already work here, but I think it's genuinely, as someone who used to make media plans, it's really crucial because no matter what you're given from a client, there's still so many levels of aspects, whether you come in first with a product or service and then find the list of companies, or you have a list of companies and you're able to learn more about them or create lookalikes, you can really use it on either end of the spectrum and get the value that you need.
And this just gives you a slightly different view of the data as well. So we ran it and through the through the verticals essentially to understand where the account sat. There was a large cluster within the software industry, and then when we paired that on top of the prior data, so understanding that a good opportunity for us was kind of 50 plus employees and 10 million in revenue, we saw that actually increased to 49% of the accounts within that segment. So in terms of planning this program, we were looking at doing an always-on activity so that everyone got some air cover. But then, in future, we might want to scale this program to look at specific industries, and this type of data really helps to inform that essentially. And then you can see how this starts to come together really. So I mentioned the always on program, and that would be basically our one-to-many program going to all the accounts. And then as we see engagement, with the program and the intent scores rising as we go, we then have the ability to look at whether we should cluster some accounts into separate activities, so one to few. And then we could even go a step further than that. And when we start to see, feedback from sales and maybe the intent spiking again, we can look at pulling out maybe one or two accounts with the greatest opportunity for us to penetrate, or kind of increase our offering within, and go into that more strategic play. And the way we've used, the data here is that, intent becomes one of those measurements to enable us to kind of factor in these types of decisions essentially, as well as, marketing spend and various other qualifications that we agree with the clients. And then really it's kind of, how does this become a program essentially at this point? So on what we've got here is the top part of this diagram represents the one-to-many element of it. So we've got our target account list. We've got intents from Bombora overlaid on that. We can see how these accounts are engaging over time. We've got things like programmatic display and social activity going out, all targeting the individual accounts here. We can actually use the Bombora account list to actually go through our DSP. So we're targeting accounts for display activity rather than just kind of targeting an industry, for example. And then we've got all your typical tactics, things like content hubs, nurture email activities, follow-up activity from the BDR team as well, and incorporating kind of some of their other MarTech as well at this point. On the one-to-few side, what we decided to do here was actually pause this for the time being, run the one-to-many, and then using intent to identify which accounts we're starting to see engagement with. We were then looking at developing a one-to-few program where we'd have some slightly higher value engagement activities in here. So things like roundtable activities for the accounts that are showing intent, making sure there's personalized comms and landing pages out the back of that. And then providing the sales team with monthly intent reports as well. So that's a nice piece about the platform, is you can, put your account list in there. You can see month on month how that's tracking, and that data can be passed over to the BDR and sales teams to help their follow up and qualification.
Yeah, I absolutely, like, my heart throbs on this slide. I love this slide. I was telling Marcus that before the call. But I think what's really amazing too is that you're able to optimize through this whole process. So it's not just setting it up and forgetting about it and, getting the data in the right places, but you're also able to log into the platform and see if the campaigns that you're running are making an impact, on the overall content consumption for those products or services for your client, and then being able to pivot if it's not at the engagement level that you want it to be at. I think that's the strongest point for me in looking at this. And I just can't thank you enough for letting us look at this.
No problem. Cool. And then the last part of this really is just around, part of this program looked at contact acquisition in some of these accounts as well. So, how do we use intent to inform that? a very simple thing is around the content actually, and what you decide to put out there for the content syndication. So in this instance, we, you can see on the right the kind of the funnel again, and where these accounts are in their buyer stage. We used this really to inform the type of content that we then wanted to use in the program. So it became evident to us that we should be using top and middle of funnel content with the client. To support with that, there are examples of where this can then, spark conversations that essentially we don't have that much top of funnel content. We need to develop some. What content topics should we base that on? And again, you can use the platform to inform a lot of that as well. So. And then the last example here is just around, I suppose it's the activation side of it. So once you've got your account list, you can run it through Bombora. Sorry, you can develop your account list on Bombora based on intent. So you're only targeting companies that are essentially surging, and what we mean by that is that they're highly engaged in specific topics. The benchmark is kind of 60 plus is what we typically look at in terms of that surge score. But you can see here the difference really in terms of the engagement rates that we typically get essentially. So a leaderboard standard format for us, might see 0.4% as a click-through rate. You can see in the lower section down there, which you've also highlighted, just how much higher that click-through rate is at 0.93. So it's 23 times the engagement rate that you would typically get with a campaign without using intent. There's metrics all over this chart that kind of pull this out. There's one on the right hand side there where we saw nearly 33 times above benchmark. So every program's different, and the level of engagement that you'll get with it, but it does kind of, at least for us, it does kind of prove that the intent does serve you much higher engagement rates and a return to demonstrate on that as well.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing this information with us. This has been extremely helpful for me, just to be able to see, I know what we talk about, but being able to see what you present to customers and how it all comes together is great. We're going to jump into Q&A really quick. I see that there is a couple in there, so I will hop over and look at those. Let's see. See, what is the formal definition of surge? What percentage above the average surge intent equates to a surge? So we kind of covered that a little later on that one slide, but just so you know, what we look at when we are saying something is surging or intent on a certain topic, it's actually a number of things. It's kind of, it's like a formula, but we're looking at number of topic of events, unique users, topic relevancy weight, overall content engagement, and we're kind of measuring that on a scale of 1 to 100. And once it hits a level 60, that's kind of when we're saying, okay, this is a significant surge, or someone is spiking with intent for a given topic or product. And we do that over a 12-week baseline. So if you remember, I said surge was the change in content consumption. So we're kind of weeding out everything that seems to be normal baseline content consumption. But with all of those things that I just mentioned combine over a 12-week baseline, and it signals an increase, we start counting that intent at the number of 60. And then of course, anything over 60 all the way up to 100 increases that intent or that surge. I hope that answers your question very formally. Okay, well, I think that's the only question we have, but please, my email's on here, so is Marcus. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us. We'll be sending out the recording after this call, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, Marcus.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. Have a really great week.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.